Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to NifnexTV. Obviously, what happened in NifnexTV is we addressed a concern that a small business or medium-sized business has, and we get the Nifnex Writers Club to address it. And we've got a great panel here today who's going to talk about a brilliant sort of case study. But at the same time, let me introduce you to the case study. It's about the IP. It's about intellectual property that leaves a business when a staff member leaves. You know, it's a classic where there's entrepreneurs who work for an organization, they work for a while, and their intention is to always leave at some point. So obviously there's going to be some sort of competition going to be happening as they leave. So we've got Dominique here to talk about IP from how do you prevent that happening from a legal perspective. We've got Daniel here who's going to talk about as an entrepreneur of the year last year. He's going to say what goes through the entrepreneur's mind. And we've got Hament from Coach 26 who's going to address it from a point of view of, how do we keep these guys, entrepreneurs, still working with us rather than having to leave. So let's hear from the panel. Just a quick introduction, and we get into it.
Certainly. Well, I'm a principal at william+hughes, based in West Perth, doing commercial and commercial litigation work. So I'm focused on the commercial litigation side of things. So where I normally see it is when it comes to a dispute, whether it be the business owner or whether it be the person that's then gone out and sought to compete. Obviously, there's often a lot of problems with that. That's going to be my perspective.
So I'm Hament Chavda from Coach 26, and we specialise in personal and business transformation. It's really taking people and businesses from where they are, and when they're ready, to lead them from their comfort zone to their growth zone, and to the next level they want to go. That's what we're about, and we'll talk a little bit about that.
Welcome. Daniel.
My name's Daniel. I'm the CEO and founder of switchmyloan.com.au. We help compare home loans for Australians and pre-negotiate rates with lenders around Australia, and then pass those savings directly to customers. So if you're familiar with Groupon, we are the Groupon for home loans. And today I'll be discussing it from an entrepreneurial perspective. I've done some work with a great not-for-profit organisation called Perfectus.org, and they help young university students who go out there and start their own businesses. And really, from my point of view, having left a large organisation to starting a business, just from that perspective of being a kind of entrepreneur and then going out there and becoming an entrepreneur and starting a business.
Well, great. I mean, we might as well stick with you in that case, Daniel. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, sure. And I think the kind of the main thrust of the topic today is about you're that disheartened individual who's in an organisation and you kind of feel like maybe you can do things better or you want to add more value, and you've been stopped along the way by the upper management or your colleagues or your peers on trying to get your perspective or your voice heard within the organisation. And usually what happens is, for politics or for all other reasons, sometimes you can't really express yourself in the right way, so you make the decision to move on. And I think employers don't really do a good enough job of sort of nurturing that talent and letting people really express themselves. And it may be the job position, it may be the division, it might be a whole range of factors. But really, I think from an entrepreneur's perspective, when you make that decision to leave, it's something that's kind of been a burning sort of desire. And usually it's one event that's taken place within your own organisation, and you say, all right, this is enough, I'm now deciding to move on. And so I think this is obviously a big challenge. Do you start a business beforehand and then move away, or do you break the ranks with your current organisation then start again? I think probably a mixture of both. Definitely starting somewhere, i.e. getting the groundwork in place, so when you do leave, at least you've got some type of foundation, so when you do go out on your own, you are prepared.
Brilliant. And touching on that, how can organisations keep staff longer? And in the previous case study that we actually discussed celebrating your wins and those sort of things, but how would you address that?
Yeah, look, we believe good people do not leave organisations. And people leave because they feel they're not fulfilled, they're not growing, they're not part of a team, they don't feel recognised. My sister left, she worked for a top 3 financial institute in the UK. She saved them like millions of dollars twice in 1 year. And she said, a couple of weeks later, someone came up to her and said, well done. And she felt unappreciated, and she left. So how do we keep good people in? One of the things I really believe is actually connecting your people to the why. You know, why are you there? Why are they coming to work? You know, what's your vision? What's your mission? What are your values? If you're just a startup or you're a big organization, that's so important. And you know, let's take an example, quick example. You know, John, he's a carpenter. He's worked for many years. He's disheartened. He's fed up with the politics. He's very good, very talented, and he's thinking, you know, I've had enough. I'm leaving. But sometimes it's too little, too late. But let's say John goes up to his owner and says, hey, you know, I'm fed up. I'm going to leave. And the owner says, well, you know what, John, I really appreciate you. I think you're a great member of the team and so on. And John says, well, I've made my mind up. And the owner says, well, he has to think about it and says, geez, I need to do something about this. Other members of the team having the same challenge. John, you know what, stay. He's been there for 25 years. He said, why don't you stay with me? Just build one more home, just one more home. So John agrees. He said, okay, I'm going to build one more home, but his heart's not in it. So he starts buying dodgy materials. His heart's not in it. Something that takes 9 months of skill and craftsmanship, he does in 6 months. He wants to get out of there. And you know, the boss turns up, and on the day when the job's finished, he looks at John in the eye and he says, here, John, I just want to say to you, it's my way of paying you back. These are the keys. This is your home. And then John realizes, and then when people have that realization of the consequences of their actions when they come into an organization and they choose to be there, to be part of the mission, to buy into your beliefs, there's a difference. And I think we mustn't also be scared or fearful of being rigorous, not ruthless, and you know, telling people who are not committed to say, hey, you know what, maybe it's time for you to move on.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Well, running into Daniel's comments about as an entrepreneur that's going to go out on their own, what do you do? Do you terminate your relationship with your employer first, or you start sort of setting up your business first? What do you do? It's probably a bit of a balance, a bit of a fine line. In the absence, for your business owners out there, in the absence of any sort of set contractual terms, any sort of formalised employment contract, there is an implied general duty on their employees that during their employment they're not going to solicit any existing customers of the business. However, there's nothing stopping them from doing that once they become former employees. Likewise, they are not meant to be using the employer's time to be setting up their own business, but that's a pretty limited obligation. I mean, realistically, there's nothing stopping them from preparing their business, preparing their circulars so that they're ready to go on the due date. The other, and it depends on how senior the employee is as well as to the extent of their obligation. So their duty of loyalty and fidelity is higher the more senior that they are. One of the problems that you have as business owners is, well, what happens when these employees leave and they take what I consider to be my commercially sensitive information? Well, again, in the absence of any sort of stipulated terms in your contract as to what the confidential information is, well, then it just comes down to general law principles, which are that, look, your trade secrets, things like that are probably protected, not meant to be taken and disclosed by the employee, but the employee is allowed to take their general know-how and experience with them. And even if it's something like a customer list, if it's a customer list of the employee, well, the employee deals with the customers, knows who the customers are, knows their contact details, well, then the employee can take that with them and use it. It's only once the employee then, on the day before they leave, go into your system, open up and download your huge customer list that, of course, they can't possibly have remembered. That's the only time when you can actually catch them out and stop them through injunctive relief from doing so. So, and you can lose so much by your employees leaving. You lose all that goodwill. They might take customers with them. It's obviously has a personal impact on you, but it also impacts upon your bottom line. So what can you do? Look, there's probably 3 things that you can do that I would suggest. One is you've really got to formalise your employment contracts with your employees. Include contractual terms that protect your position. So now what that means is you can have terms in your employment contract, and generally employees are coming on board, they wouldn't have the faintest idea whether it's they're not in really a negotiating position usually. Sometimes they will be, generally they won't be. They'll accept what you put before them generally. So why not have in there non-solicitation clauses that are don't just rely on the general law position, put it in there that they can't solicit your customers while they're employed by you, but then also extend that for at least a period of time after they leave. Put in restraint of trade clauses. Now, you need to get professional advice on all of these sorts of things. For example, restraint of trade clauses generally are considered to be against public policy, so you need to have some sort of cascading set of clauses so that at least one of those clauses will stand up, but put them in. Determine in your employment contract what is confidential information as far as you are concerned. Don't leave it to some court later on to look at it objectively and say, well, we think this is confidential and this isn't. Take the opportunity to write it down there, agree between you and make it as inclusive as possible. Make it anything that the employee does becomes your property, depending on the nature of your business. If you've got designs, let's pick up the housing example, although maybe from a different perspective. Let's say you're employing people to draft house designs and stuff for you. Well, you want to make sure you've got something in your employment contract that says, look, anything they produce in the period that they're employed with you is deemed to be your property. Okay, so they're not drawing up all these designs using all the know-how that you're giving them, and then they're saying, oh yes, I drafted that while I was employed by you, but it was always meant to be for me. It was my own personal property. I want to stop all that. So that's the first point. That was a bit lengthy. I'll keep the other ones a bit shorter, but the second one is keep control. So email accounts, one of the big problems that I often see is you get people that are very senior positions within a business, and they'll be using their own Gmail, Yahoo email accounts. Don't allow that. Make them use your work email account that you create for them, so you've always got access to it, you've always got control over it. And if all of a sudden you pick up, hang on, there's a Gmail there between them and a customer, even though it might be innocent, immediately an alarm bell's got to ring. You've got to say, why are they using a private account to correspond with this person? Okay? Because you want to make sure that if they leave, you've got that there. And you can always explain that to your employee by saying, look, what happens if you get hit by a bus tomorrow? I need to make sure I've got all the documents. Okay, so you can always explain that one. Things like administration rights over LinkedIn, make sure you've got that. So all the customers, they're part of your business's LinkedIn account, not the person's private connections. Okay, and just lastly, knowledge is power. So what do you know about your employees? Are they taking holidays to China and China happens to be just where you source all your product from? Why are they doing that? Have they got a husband? Have they got a wife? Have they got kids? What's their position in life? Have they got a big mortgage? So you know that they have to stay on with you, and you might feel a bit of comfort. But they've been saving up a whole heap of money, or they got some big payment, some cash payment coming in. You might think, well, that's potential capital for them to then go out on their own. Those sorts of things just should be kicking around in the back of your mind. They're probably my 3 suggestions for you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Dominic. Just talking about staff engagement, actually the third point, getting to know the families and everyone else. I'd like to sort of address Hament there. You do a lot of firewalking stuff, don't you? Is that something that's part of team building and culture within the organisation as well?
Yeah, well, look, the fire is just a metaphor. And, we believe the most hideous crime is suppressing someone's potentiality. So you want to treat other people like you want to be treated. You want to bring out your potential in the same way your team wants to bring out their potential too. Oftentimes when people don't bring out the potential, it's because they have a fear. And the only way to combat fear is to face a higher fear. So we use the firewalk as a form of, wow, if I can do that, what else can I do? One of our sister businesses in Nature's Harvest, it's a health destination. We have juice bars, naturopaths, coaches, and so on. And we took the whole team there, and we saw this shift in transformation where people drop the baggage, drop the luggage, and say, you know what else is possible? And if we have we supply food. So there's 2 people in our team who have a company called Aura, and they supply bliss balls, and they also supply us. So it's like a micro business between a business, and we don't mind that. We're okay. We'll support them because it's part of their growth, and they love that. And when they're ready, if they want to leave, we're happy with that. But we have an understanding with them. We have a trust with them, and it feels good for us because it's part of our mission to bring to light the magnificence in people, internal customers and external customers. So look, there's lots of processes. One of the things I truly believe in is investing in the well-being and the health of the people. And one of the programs that we do, Lunch and Learn, is all about going back to the basics. Are you drinking lots of water? Are you getting enough sleep? And so on. And basically just covering the basics, because stress is a major challenge. And it's not about drinking more coffee. That's like taking a bank loan. You've got to pay that back. It's not about drinking more Red Bull. It's not about having late nights and so on. It's sometimes about rejuvenation of the mind, the body, the spirit, the soul, and saying, hey, you know what? Who am I? What am I capable? What am I great at? And bringing that out of your team. And stress is a big challenge today. So health and well-being is a big must. And that program is part of the health and well-being. Yeah. We focus on body and the power of the mind. Yeah.
Excellent. I love the analogy there. But going to Daniel, though, if your former employer had done all of that, would that sort of made you stay back in the organization, or would you still move? And just getting your opinion.
Sure. From my perspective, I think not. I think, as I mentioned before, I think that entrepreneurial drive sometimes just overpowers everything. And just to embellish the points that Dominique made, I think, I guess these are the 5 things that I thought about as being of critical importance if you are making that transition from employer to going out on your own, is be transparent. I think letting your superiors or your employer know what you're doing, I think, is a very good thing. You never should burn bridges. I think leaving a good legacy is very important, because you don't know when your former employer might actually become of importance to you, and you to them as well. So that's what I often find with people who've gone out into a different industry and set up a business. They'll often refer back to their former employer, and there might be potential for doing business together. So in that moment of frustration, I would say always keep your cool. And make sure that you leave a really good legacy behind, so they'll be advocates of you once you leave the organisation as well. Deliver the painful news and do it quickly. If you suspect that your employer might not like your departure and escort you out of the building with security detail, then make sure that you deliver the painful news and sort of get on with it. If they're okay having you there, then I think being open and transparent about what you're going to do afterwards, I think is really important as well. And also keep your support network, because when you do go out on your own, you'll experience this sort of deluge of loneliness for the better part of 6 months or a year, or however long it takes. And all that support network that you get in a large organisation is no longer there. So all those people that liked you, keep in touch with those guys, and they're the ones that are really going to make each day easier for you once you start breaking out on your own. So they're the 5 things that I think people should look out for when they venture out onto their own.
Perfect. So obviously, in a nutshell, you can't hold an entrepreneur back, and the driving force is too strong. But you can do what you can to sort of hold them back together. But of course, you're going to follow the 3 points that Dominique mentioned to make sure when they do leave, the IP sort of stays in there.
You try and control the damage.
Control the damage, that's it.
It is a significant risk for you, and that's often where you'll see with consultants that you've got a formal consultancy agreement that sets out the terms quite clearly. It's just a matter of being on top of that, being very conscious about what you are handing out to these consultants, what the value of that is to your business, and then just thinking about, well, how can I protect that? Quite often people will just go out and deal with third-party consultants without giving that any thought. So it's just a matter of just being conscious about what you're doing with your property. They can do. Again, it depends on what country you're dealing with in terms of trying to take some sort of overseas enforcement action. And that is, again, is a risk that you need to be very conscious of when you're dealing with a third-party consultant. So, for example, if they're based in Malaysia, for example, you'll have a lot of difficulties in trying to commence proceedings against that company or that individual over there. You might want to see what sort of local presence they've got, if any, and that may well be a deciding factor if you're choosing between consultants as to who you use, whether you buy local or buy overseas. There could be a number of things you can do. It'll depend on your circumstances and the nature of your business.
One of the companies that we've used in the past is EasyVA, and they have an office in the eastern states. So at least you have some element of, come back and, if you have any challenge, you can go back to an office here, because they're actually Australian business, but they have some of the team offshore. So that's the way that I would suggest is the best way to proceed, yeah.
If you're contracting with a third party, you might say, look, in your contract, the laws of Western Australia apply and any proceedings can be brought in WA. But that only helps you to the extent that property, whether it be your intellectual property, isn't already gone overseas and you're trying to get that back. Okay, you might get an order from a court in WA saying, yes, this property must be returned, destroyed, whatever. But then how are you actually going to enforce that in that other country? Very hard. One of the problems that we're seeing, for example, at the moment is with cloud computing, where this is a slightly different context, but companies are going into liquidation or administration, and they've got all of their documents stored up in the cloud, and the cloud happens to be based on a server that's overseas, and then the local administrator or liquidator is saying, well, I've got rights under Australian law to have this property, give it back, and they're stuck in the position where they can be held to ransom by the server company, because they say, well, you're not going to be able to get that information from us unless you pay us X amount of dollars, or what we're owed to get it back. So that's an example of a risk that's really coming to the fore in the modern technology. I don't see why not. It might appear to be an onerous process to impose that on people, but certainly I've been involved, even myself as a volunteer, in a number of situations where you do have to sign up with various contracts, particularly if you're going to have your hands on confidential information or things that involve people's privacy. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a matter of getting your contracts in place. You can have a precedent that you use, and then you just roll it out from there. Generally, you can tinker with it a bit for everyone depending on their circumstance, but yeah, absolutely. Why not include volunteers if you're going to give them something that's going to create a risk for you? Yeah.
So, Daniel, would you like to give your hot 5 tips?
Yeah, so just reiterating the points I mentioned before, transparency about your decision, don't burn bridges, make sure you set up as best as possible before you leave, deliver the painful news, do it quickly, and keep your support network there in place after you've moved out on your own.
Yeah, 5 tips would be, first one, know your identity, your vision, mission and values, because unless you know what your identity is, your team's not going to know. Secondly, hire the right people. Based on, do they believe what you believe in? And when you ask questions, rather than saying to them, let's say, one of our values is wow, amazing customer service, rather than saying, what do you think about customer service? You'd ask them, can you give me a specific time in your life when you gave wow, amazing customer service? Tell me about that. Because they'll have to then reference a specific time when they actually action that and have experienced it themselves. And to add to that, don't be afraid to let people go. Because whatever you ignore becomes accepted, whatever you accept becomes conditioned, whatever becomes conditioned becomes permanent. So, by accepting that behavior and mediocrity, other team members are watching this. Third part would be invest in the health and well-being of your team. Definitely really, really important, especially in today's fast-paced, go, go, go mindset, really important. The fourth coming from that is actually looking at what do your team love? What are they great at? And if you put them in a role, let's just say 2 people in the kitchen, right? And you have one person who's very creative and ideas person and so on, and one person who's very detailed. Well, if you put them into the opposite roles, what's the food going to taste like? But if you switch the roles based on their strengths, all of a sudden the customer's going to taste that, they're going to see it, they're going to feel that. And the person loves what they're doing, and you're going to empower them with that. So have a look, ask them, what do you love doing? And the fifth one, which is really the foundation, which is the most important, is lead by example. Oftentimes they go to, we have training sessions, they come to training, and they go back into their environment, and sometimes they're seeing, mixed messages. Oh, we did this in training, but I'm not seeing that in store. So strength of the leader, strength of the pack, and that's so, so important. So lead by example, and that kind of seeps through everything. Yeah.
Thank you.
In terms of 5 hot tips, on the subject that we've just done, I'll just stick with those 3 points that I've suggested to you. But as SMEs, most if not all of you will be tenants of premises. So just to run on a slightly different angle, as a tenant of a premises, you'll either have a retail shop sort of lease, or you'll have just a general commercial lease. Retail shop will be if you're in any sort of complex generally. There's a whole heap of different little rules about it. But if you are setting up in that sort of environment, my suggestions for you are this. Firstly, keep in mind that particularly in the current day and age, your relationship between you and your landlord, it's a standard commercial relationship that both parties can negotiate. We're no longer in a situation where you just have to accept whatever's put to you by your landlord. You do have an opportunity to push back should you wish so. Secondly, long gone are the days now where the landlords can force you to pay all of their legals for putting the lease together. You used to have to pay all the landlord's costs in getting the lease, which was for the landlord's benefit. Now, rather than paying their legals, you have the opportunity to go out and maybe apply that money, if you like yourself, to getting some of your own legal advice and pushing back a bit on that negotiation. That position changed in about December 2011, okay? Thirdly, I see a lot of, I act mainly for landlords, but sometimes act for tenants. But what I do see is often the landlords don't get it right when they're calculating their rent, when they're calculating their variable outgoings. Keep in mind things like that your landlord has to give you an annual estimate of variable outgoings if you're going to be paying them before they can force you to pay them, things like that. Don't be scared to put in your own default terms. Usually you'll see that if you as a tenant are defaulting on your lease, you'll have to pay all the landlord's costs. Well, what about if the landlord defaults? Landlords do default, so think about that sort of scenario yourself. Lastly, just be conscious of fit-out terms. When and under what circumstances are you able to put your own fit-out into your premises? What happens to that fit-out when you leave? Have a bit of a think about it rather than just going ahead and doing it. They're probably my 5 hot tips for the retail shops leases, to the extent that any of you are involved in those as tenants. Good luck.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you, Hament. Daniel, does anyone have any questions? So, ready? Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. And we'll do more case studies after lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.